Okay, here we're going to start talking about storyboards. Go into a little bit about film language, but mostly about creating storyboards for your team project. Apologize for any sounds you guys hear in the background. They're doing construction outside my house. Okay, so story, we're right here. You guys have come up with your ideas. You're probably going to pitch them if you haven't already. We're going to create boards to represent moments or frames of our film and translate them into 2D, and then eventually we'll bring them into 3D to try to recreate. There we go. There we are. All right, so storyboards are the visual map for your film. So you're using storyboards to essentially plot out your entire film from like the camera's perspective. And we're trying to figure out the perspective, like where we're looking from, the camera angle, the shot framing, composition, the layout of the characters and the environment to some degree. It's supposed to be fast and simple way to brainstorm. They don't have to look pretty. It's okay if they look pretty, but you know what's more important is you guys get ideas out and go fast. All right, so this is our main communication tool and probably the fastest way for us to brainstorm before we actually get into 3D. Because once you're in 3D, you have to actually create the assets. It takes a lot longer. So when we work on animated films and in the industry and on any project, depending on the project, everything that we do should be in service of the story. So everything should be telling the story efficiently and clearly so that the viewer isn't feeling like they're lost and that all the right information is being passed along to them. When we're looking at a film, a short film or a feature film, shots cut quickly, right? Sometimes shots can last less than a second, right? And a lot of times we're also moving between multiple shots that can last less than a few seconds. Think about an action sequence or a fight sequence, right? You're constantly cutting the camera back and forth, right? And you're also moving through a three-dimensional space. So it's really easy for the viewer to lose focus. So that's why as a storyboard artist and when you get into layout and when you start working with cameras, the idea is you want to keep the focus clear and simple. So you're emphasizing in the shot and in your storyboards the important information. And then you're also simplifying everything around them so it's easy to read. So it should be fast. Making storyboards should be fast and they should be easy to understand and look at. Story beats are kind of like a preliminary storyboard. This is essentially moments of your major plot or your major story shown through boards, but they're not necessarily representative of camera shots or moments. They're not necessarily literal moments in your film. They're just kind of representative. They might be like initial storyboards, like that might actually be a shot that you're coming up with. So a beat board is this preliminary storyboard, but with just moments. So you can see with this film, these frames don't really make sense together. Like they aren't necessarily narratively flowing one to the other, but they are in order of what happens in the film. But the idea is to show this kind of layout of the entire film through these boards. A storyboard will actually take an individual scene, so you can think of these as like individual different scenes in the film, right? So the characters plotting in a room, characters plot, this is probably the same shot or same environment. You know, these rough characters in the tavern, overhearing them, these characters doing the heist, right? So these are different sequences or scenes in the film. So they're represented as different boards. A storyboard is going to take one of those scenes and it's going to build out essentially flesh it out more with more frames. So you can see where characters move, how the character moves, what happens over time. You're going to get character acting, camera movements, camera angles. So beat boards are the moments of the story. Storyboards are the moments in a shot or a sequence. Here's another example we can see. So this beat board for this kid getting bullied, this story about a kid being bullied. So the first part is showing the beginning of the story. The major plot point is kid gets bullied. Then the next major plot point is kid has transformation. Third plot point is kid who's now Hulk scares away the bullies, right? And so the storyboards would be breaking that down into actually like how it would play out if you were watching it as a film or an animated feature, right? So you have the intro scene of this kid walking. We're thinking about camera, right? We're thinking about how the camera is moving, where it's placed at, what point of view we're getting. The beat boards, we're just looking at kind of like representative of the actual story moment, whereas these are actually kind of going through and actually showing what happens with the camera and over time. Kid walks, camera moves up, kid bumps, falls out of frame. We have this reverse shot looking down on the kid, and then we have this shot of the looking down on the kid, and then we have this reverse shot of the bullies looking up. So it goes into more detail over showing the moments in time. It's important to talk about camera angle and placement, and we're going to look at some of those in a second, and how we stage things, whether that's through the camera's placement, what we're cutting off and showing, how close we are to the character, how deep the space is. All that stuff has a huge impact on how we as a viewer are going to interpret that scene or that moment emotionally. So you can see on this left side, this is the example here is between dynamic and flat staging. So dynamic staging or dynamic framing would be that the characters' relationships in space are exaggerated. So you have a deeper space, there's a lot more distance. It's a much more interesting angle, right? It's almost kind of like in the action with the character. The angle of the actual lens is probably shorter or wider, which causes more exaggeration and perspective. And so this kind of creates like a really dramatic moment, right? You can feel the drama in this. There's a lot more dynamic elements to it. And you compare it to this shot over here, this is called flat. And a lot of times you'll hear flat is funny. If you want a good example, go back and watch a movie like Napoleon Dynamite, or really any film that has flat staging. I think a lot of Wes Anderson films have flat staging, which they're not always necessarily explicitly funny, but they're always kind of quirky and a little humorous. But flat is easy to understand and look at. It kind of removes the drama, right? This is the same moment. When you're right here, you can like feel the person like breathing and sweating and like pumping their legs. And then when you get to this shot, it kind of feels like they're at a distance, and it's a bit of a dud compared to this one. It's kind of like something looks really, really dramatic from here, but when we look at it from this place, it's not that impressive, or it's just not as dynamic as the other point, right? So we see a lot more of the frame. It's not as deep, right? We're not getting those dramatic depth elements, right? The camera angle is pretty static, whereas this one's kind of like looking up at the character, right? So this is just much more neutral. So we also have this to change. You can see this in this situation down here too, right? This flat shot right here feels very safe. It feels like it's just a shot that's kind of used to establish the scene, but isn't necessarily meant to deliver any dramatic emotional components, right? But as soon as we change the angle, right, we're looking at a different perspective. The angles in the environment are different. We have more depth, right? This coffee cup is closer to us. That clock is farther away from us. It creates some drama to the scene, right? It makes what he's doing or what we're seeing feel like it's supposed to be more dramatic or more interesting. So storyboards don't have to be beautiful. And they only have to show really what's important. So here's an example of storyboards for television, some cartoon show that I'm not aware of. And so you can really see the acting of the characters. You can see them in relationship to the table, and maybe even like some of these lunch or purse items. I don't know what they are. And the relationships to each other, right? But you don't really get a sense of anything else because it's not really important for the storyboards or telling this moment in this scene. And then also, use storyboards to explore different ways of telling the scene, right? To view different angles, try different perspectives. As long as it makes sense for your story, try something else out. Don't settle for just the standard, two shots where you have like character on the left side, character on the right side, just jumping back and forth between them, right? Try something different if it makes sense to your story. So this is clearly like have like a worm's eye view with like a really distorted fisheye lens, and we have like this really dramatic staging these characters and overlapping of elements, deep space, right? Really cool for an action shot. So we're going to talk about different types of shots. Here's just like a cool little diagram to come back and look at. On the left-hand side, we're talking about essentially distances of the camera from the subject. And on the right-hand side, we're talking about angles and different types of shots. So establishing shot is very common. It's essentially a shot that is meant to establish the geographic location for the scene that's about to happen. So it would be like in the instance of this example from Harry Potter, right? The film is about to transition to occurring inside of this castle, right? And so in order to make, part of it is to show the wonder of the main characters as they see Hogwarts for the first time, but it's also meant to kind of get us, the viewer, comfortable with this new location we're about to be in. If we were at like this Harry Potter's home, right, and then the next sequence that we cut to is inside of Hogwarts and we've never seen Hogwarts before or the outside, we'd be very confused, understandably. So we'd want to know where we are, why'd we, like, where's this castle, what are we inside of? So these establishing shots are usually very far away, right? So they're kind of at a very extreme distance so we can kind of see the environment. Our characters are usually too small and seen for us to focus on them because the intent is not to see the character necessarily in relationship to the environment all the time. It's more of just kind of informing us where we're going to be at. Okay, so here's an example from Skyfall showing, this is going to be a shot right before Bond goes inside, right? So showing his car and showing the location he's about to be in, right? Here's Gandalf approaching Gondor, again, showing the city of Gondor is really important because we're about to spend a lot of time inside that space, and it helps us visually understand where we're at when we see these relationships. Okay. The next shot is a wide shot, or sometimes called a long shot. And some of these shot terms and names are used interchangeably with different angles and different distances. So it can be a little confusing sometimes. But a wide shot is like the next level in. So we get into the environment enough that we can see the characters, right? And so this sets a local scene. So like the local environment that the characters are about to be operating in, or the scene's about to be performed in. And it shows the characters in relationship to each other, right? And the relationship to their local environment. And so once we get closer in, we're going to be cropping off a lot of information. We're not going to be seeing everything at the same time. So again, this, just like the establishing shot, this is meant to kind of get us comfortable with the space before we get closer in and start cutting to really tight shots, right? This is sometimes also called a master shot. So here's a scene from Taxi Driver showing Travis Bickle in relationship to these other characters around him, the diner, right? Showing him kind of, separated alone. Same thing with The Martian, right? Showing Matt Damon's character in relationship to Mars. North by Northwest, showing the physical distance, that separation of the roadway between these two characters, right? And 7, it feels like if you've watched this film, this scene starts with this wide shot. You can also kind of think of it like an establishing shot, but it's a wide shot where it's kind of feeling like we're coming into the middle of their conversation of this dinner, right? So as they get more relaxed and they're kind of enjoying each other's company, it's kind of like we're voyeurs, like listening in a little bit on their conversation. Okay, so shot size is these next parts of shot size, or these next categories of shot size are in relationship to the character that is in the film, right? So here's a handy chart. You'll see plenty of these where the terminology or the naming of these has to do with how much of the character is in frame, right? So imagine this being the camera frame and where it's cutting them off. And so depending on where it cuts them off is the description of what these types of shots are, right? So full shot is going to be that full body, and then medium close-up shot is going to be like from below the chest. This is something that's not necessarily important for you guys, but it's fun to know sometimes is most of the time these, where people decide to cut, or where the cinematographer or master of photography, whatever, decides to cut the frame, is dependent on key body parts. And so there's like a standard or like a convention that a lot of directors like to use. So usually it's these joints like the ankles, the knees, the waist, the elbow, the wrist, the chin and the base of the neck, and even these little tangential areas. So like clipping the toes or clipping just the top of the head. It just creates this discomfort. And just like the kind of the same idea of tangents, right? So tangents where a line or a border just barely touches something, it creates like a discomfort in the viewer. So usually it's either it gives it more space around it. So if I was going to cut in on the head, I would, give a little space around the head and not cut off of the chin or the top of the head, or I'd go further than the boundaries of the head. So I'd go past the chin or go past the top of the head. You guys don't have to worry about this too much, but sometimes it's helpful to know. Oops. Full shot is a shot that just captures the full figure, right? So you see them from their feet to their head. Again, this is supposed to kind of show them give them a little bit of context of their environment, but we're focusing on a character, or sometimes on multiple characters if there's multiple in frame at the same kind of prominence. It also, what's nice about a full shot is it's wide enough that if a character is going to be moving or doing a complex action, it's easy to follow along with them and capture that whole action of their body. So here's an example of Guardians of the Galaxy, right? Showing them in that lineup. A boy in striped pajama, these kids running, right? And so the shot's easy for us to track all these multiple characters with the camera and get their bodies and their motion in shot. Medium shot is going to be Kissorn had a medium shot, which is essentially going to be a waist up. I'm not sure why I don't have any here, but a medium shot, if we look back at this example, is going to be from that waist up, right? And so as we get closer, we're focusing more and more on the character and less on their environment. So usually we're focusing on an emotional response or something they're trying to say or a detail about them in the shot. Medium close-up shot is going to be from the chest up, so going from the waist up to the chest, right? So we're getting a little bit closer. We're really trying to get into the headspace of the character a little bit more. A close-up shot is going to be essentially bounding in the head, so it'd be like this framing right here. So it's Jack Torrance from The Shining, right? Trying to get into like the intensity of his manic, his manic psychosis or whatever. We really get in close on his head and eliminate everything else. An extreme close-up is going to be focusing on like a specific detail, body part, or more of a stylistic flair. So you'll see it pretty commonly in like, westerns, and where we have like showing like a character's resolve or steely grit. And so we focus in on their eyes. So here's a close-up shot from the master, right? This is almost kind of like a point of view shot because she's looking right in the camera. I can't remember exactly what the sequence is like, but it's kind of like creating like an intimate moment between, I think, Amy Adams' character and Joaquin Phoenix's character. So getting this close kind of is almost like a point of view shot where we're almost like hypnotized by this Amy Adams character with Joaquin Phoenix. Shaun of the Dead, another close-up shot. And he's this is an example of they're using this close-up shot to kind of like eliminate or blur out the rest of the world as he gets he's kind of like shell-shocked by the news or what's changed. Either that, or it might be the part of the film where he might have got broken up by his girlfriend. So so he's kind of numb and shell-shocked, and so everything kind of fades out, and we're just focusing on him being dumbfounded. Right, The Revenant, close-up shot of this character just kind of like brutally trying to survive. And then Little Miss Sunshine, I don't remember what the scene specifically is about, but this extreme close-up, in this case, is kind of creating this mental connection with what she's looking at and what's going on in her thought process, right? So a lot of times you'll see like a shot of like a detail, and you'll see a reverse shot of a character's eyes to just kind of create that, establish that connection between what a character is looking at and that object. And extreme close-up, really useful for showing detail shots a little, whether it's like something like this where she's plucking feathers out of her skin, or there's like a logo on some keys or on a piece of evidence that a character just notices. So it's just revealing to us as the viewer like what important detail we're almost missing. So majority of shots of characters are in between medium and full shots. So they're somewhere between, you know, around the chest area to like the thigh or feet area, right? And so that's whenever we're getting into interactions between characters, whether that's dialogue or acting or characters' thought processes, once we want to focus on a character, we're in those medium and full shots, right? So we want to get emphasis on character, dialogue, and their relationships to other characters. Here's a great example from the King's Speech: multiple characters in a medium full shot, cut off at their thighs, right, to kind of get them all in the same space. But again, we're just focusing on these characters. True Grit, medium shot, focusing on, I can't remember what his name is, but Jeff Daniels. No, not Jeff Daniels. I can't remember what his name is. Maybe it is Jeff Daniels. I can't remember. It's not Jeff Daniels. But cropping in on his waist, right, as we get, we're listening to what he's saying during this dialogue scene. All right, so now we should talk about shot angles. So the first shot angle you should know about is just the standard or neutral shot angle, called an eye level shot, also called a neutral shot. So this is where the camera itself is not being tilted up or down, left or right, or being rolled, right? So it's just neutral. It's perfectly flat. Eye level usually means that the height or placement of the camera is in line with the actor's eyes, right? So we feel like we're kind of in the same height level as these characters. We feel like we're down at their height level. So this is really just, for one, it's pretty safe, it's pretty neutral, but it also creates a connection between us and those characters, right? We're not supposed to feel anything necessarily dramatic in relationship to them in terms of power levels, but we're supposed to feel their emotion. We're supposed to connect to them emotionally. So we're supposed to feel like we're there. So here's some good examples, right? Feeling like we're in part of the conversation or in the thought process of these characters and connecting with them. Some variants of this is the angle of the camera isn't changing, but the height or placement of it is. So shoulder level is, you know, the camera is still not angled, but it's being brought lower at the character's shoulder so that the character is a little bit higher and more prominent, right? Which makes the character a little bit more powerful or strong or confident in the frame. Hip level is where now we're down kind of where that character's hip is. In this case, from Reservoir Dogs, you know, it's also conveniently putting us kind of eye level with this character who's being tied up and about to be tortured, essentially. And so it kind of creates this power dynamic between these characters and between us and this character to give him a little bit more power in the frame. Knee level, again, kind of creating size and relationships between characters in the film. So now we're down close to the knees, but again, the angle of the camera is still not changing. We're not tilting it up, we're not tilting it down to look down at something. We're neutral, we're pointing straight ahead. And this character is being essentially dominated by all these foreground characters. And then ground level, this is where the camera is literally sitting on the ground, and we can see that detail shot for this detail shot from one of the Star Wars movies. So a low angle shot is where we start tilting the camera. Let me go ahead and show you guys this, right? So the three terms we're going to use is pan, tilt, and roll. So tilting is it's kind of like nodding your head, right? It's where you're either looking down or you're looking up. Panning is like you're shaking your head no, right? You're looking left and right. And then rolling would be like if you were cracking your neck, right? Or like a dog tilting their head to listen to something better. So it's like you're rolling your head so that everything's starting to tilt in the world, right? Tilt, I shouldn't say tilt. But as everything's kind of like, you know, the horizon line is no longer parallel or level with your eye line, it's now going off angle and now being diagonal. Okay, so a low angle shot or a up shot is where we're low and we're looking up at the subject. So this emphasizes power dynamics and size differences between characters in the film, right? Or subjects in the shot. Usually it makes the person who's higher that we're looking up at more powerful or dangerous. And an extreme version of this, if we were on the like down in the dirt, right, at the very ground level, would be called a worm's eye view, as if we were a worm looking up at the world. So you can see this little diagram right here, this camera tilting up. Okay, so this example from Brave, right, the moment of triumph for the character. It's a slight tilt up, slight up shot. And then we have this extreme low angle shot from Snatch, I think it was. Very stylish and very exaggerated and extreme. And again, creating this very much just like a stylistic choice, but also creating this power dynamic between this character and this character right here. A high angle shot is a shot that is up high and tilted to look down. So this is where we're above the subjects and we're looking down on them. So again, this is emphasizing size and power dynamics, but it makes the subjects look like they're a little bit more vulnerable. This is also called a down shot. An extreme version of this would be a bird's eye view, like you're a bird up high looking down. So Matilda, right, showing this character as a little girl. I haven't seen this movie before, honestly, but it's a great shot example. It shows a person behind like a giant desk, and then it shows this little girl, and it's really exaggerated to kind of punctuate her helplessness. She's just like a poor innocent little girl who's the world is treating unfairly. And then Harry Potter, right, he's literally down on the ground as he's about to be attacked by a Dementor, I think. And so showing, looking down on him almost from, not necessarily from this over here, Matilda, we're almost in the perspective of the character who has power of this subject, but over here, not quite so, but still kind of we're up higher than them, he's down lower, which kind of takes away some of his power and agency. Right, and here's a bird's eye view from Mystic River, I believe, of this character. It's just a cool shot showing him being swarmed by all these cops, but this is when he finds out that someone close to him died. Here's a good example showing how this high angle shot or this down shot kind of creates, poor Mrs. Otter doesn't know where her husband is, and so she's alone and helpless, and just makes her feel small, especially compared to this giant cop. Okay, so talking about, we're about to talk about rolling the camera. We're not really going to talk about panning because it's pretty straightforward, but when we roll the camera, so the other shot, before we weren't rolling the camera, so it was just a neutral shot, right? So we're not, it's just kind of level with the world. A Dutch angle shot would be where we start to roll the camera. This essentially makes it the horizon line, and what normally would be flat angles in the environment are now diagonal. So it creates a sense of instability, movement, and tension, and it's usually used in films to make something feel off and like it's about to move quickly, like there's about to be action, or something is wrong, or something isn't safe, right? So tilting it, doing that Dutch angle shot, or rolling our camera like that, will just kind of it's kind of like being on a ship in high seas. It creates a sense of instability. Right, so all of these examples, here, this character is feeling like he's going crazy. Here, this is just like a really fun action sequence, but very dynamic and very fast. And then here in Do the Right Thing, it's about to be a moment of like increased dramatic tension. So it's kind of like making it feel like a little less comfortable. Okay. Over the shoulder shot is probably one of the most common shots that a lot of us are aware of. It's where you are essentially standing behind somebody with a camera and filming another person over one person's shoulder. So in this case, we have both of these characters from Hugo talking back and forth to each other, and the camera is essentially sitting above their shoulder, and filming the opposite character. We like to have this other character often in the frame as well, right? So in this dialogue scene, if two characters are talking to each other, if I'm filming this guy, right, I like to have her in the frame still, because it kind of establishes that he's talking to her, and it kind of, again, gives me a clue for the environment and how these characters relate to each other in that environment. A shot reverse, or reverse shot, is where we're from the opposite side. So we're over here looking over his shoulder, looking at her. And again, the same thing, right? He's out of focus in the foreground. We just have to get enough of him to understand who he is and what this is in the frame, but we're focusing on her in this shot. All right, so here's a over the shoulder shot, right? Looking down on this character and then coming back. I'm not going to play this. I'll play it, but turn off the sound. This dialogue conversation situation between these characters. Some of the shots you will see are going to be over the shoulder shots, where you actually can see one character in the foreground and the other character in the focus. And sometimes these shots don't actually have that character in the frame, right? So you can see in that previous shot right here, Leonardo DiCaprio is not in the frame, but this one right here, Matthew McConaughey, is in the frame, right? And there might be a variety of reasons. Sometimes it's just for variety and making it more interesting. And a lot of times it's like, for instance, in this sequence, it's kind of like Leonardo DiCaprio's character is kind of being surprised or a little bit weirded out by Matthew McConaughey's sort of antics and his weird way of talking, right? So by removing Leonardo DiCaprio, it's kind of like almost putting us into the point of view of Leonardo DiCaprio. What's important is just keeping continuity and screen direction so that we're just understanding where we are in this shot, and not introducing anything so dramatic that it pulls us out of the sequence and confuses us, right? And you can see, there's also this shot right here showing their physical relationship to each other. That's just placed in there. Here's an example of Alien, right? Again, kind of like that Wolf of Wall Street example, we don't have this character in the foreground in this shot, but we get Ripley just off frame right here to kind of show her relationship to this cyborg dude. Spoiler alert. Continuity. So continuity is the idea that talking about how quickly shots move and how much we're moving in space and how we're cutting instantly from one viewpoint to another viewpoint, which we're not used to as humans. The less time you have to adapt, the better, because it means people aren't getting lost, people aren't getting confused, and they can understand and keep up with the story faster. So continuity is the idea that between shots, you're not changing things so dramatically that you're going to confuse the audience. You can do a lot of different tricks to kind of get around this, which we'll talk about. But yeah, the main idea is you just don't want it to be so drastic that people are being completely confused if you're trying to shoot the same sequence. Screen direction is one of those ways that we keep continuity and action and narrative moving in a comfortable direction. So that's the idea behind screen direction, is a character either moving through space from one direction to another. So even though we have different shots that we're showing, the character in this example is still moving left to right, right? So he's moving from left, and then we cut to a new shot. He's still going from left of the camera to right of the camera, right? And then in this case, obviously, there's narrative reasons why you don't always have the character go left to right for the entire film, right? So he encounters something, turns around, right? So this is really easy to follow. Is, between these shots, he's moving in the same direction. Screen direction can also talk about just literally placement in the frame. So looking back at like the two shot, over the shoulder shot, this character is always on screen left, and this woman is on the screen right? And so no matter which these shots are, they're both still always going to be on the left. He's always going to be on the left, and she's always going to be on the right? So you can see down here, even though we have a shot where it's not showing both of them, she's still kind of, biasing towards right. And then when she leaves the film, or leaves the shot, like if she turned, she's going to turn that way, right? And even this shot that's showing like a wider angle, with more distance, he's still on the left and she's still on the right. So that's just establishing that screen direction and maintaining it, again, is just going to keep us less confused when we're looking or watching the film. All right, here's another example. You know, this character's on the left, this character's on the right. You know, he kicks him, this character moves from left to right. We're changing kind of angle direction of what we're viewing, but again, character's still going left to right, character's still going left to right, right? So keeping that left to right momentum makes the action pretty easy to follow. So screen position or matching cuts ends one shot in a way that the focal point lines up with the focal point of a following shot. So because we're already looking at that spot in the screen, we adapt fast, right? So in this case, the focal point of these shots are almost always on the left, right? So when we jump to the next shot, you know, we have this character, you know, he's right here in the left, and then we jump to a new shot, he's still on the left, we're still already looking there, right? Obviously, again, just like screen direction, it's not something that we do all the time, right? Because it's just going to be, it's not really helpful all the time. But when we can do it, it helps maintain continuity and makes it easy for us to follow. Right, so in this case, this character is more or less always on the left, and this character is on the right in the middle, and they kind of also start to line up with each other. So that focal point of where you're supposed to be looking isn't changing that much between these shots. Right, match cut would be kind of like a more extreme version of this. So let's go ahead and scale this up. So a match cut is essentially where you really try to get the composition or objects or elements in the frame to really line up with elements or compositional elements in the next frame or that next scene, right? So in all these examples, right, they're really trying to get these really, really strong compositional elements that match with each other. In this case, you know, we're playing around with movement, right? So the character turning her head, right, lining up with the little girl's head turning, right? Almost feels like she's in the same shot, kind of moving between those two shots just by turning. Okay. So a match cut is just like a Dutch angle shot. There's something you want to be kind of careful with. You don't want to do them all the time because they do kind of call a little bit of attention to themselves sometimes, but they are definitely very stylish and fun, right? And they can be really handy too. Like in this case, for both these characters, kind of creating this time skip relationship between these characters. Oh, this little girl is this woman, and this man is this little boy, right? So really helpful in that situation. Right, in this case, showing like again a time skip, and then also using this newspaper or this ad to move between these scenes. Like he finds the advertisement in the film or in the newspaper, and then you know you can tell that place he's at. The reason why he's there is for that advertisement. Okay. So the 180-degree rule is one of the ways that we maintain relative screen direction and continuity between characters. The idea is if there are two characters or a major direction of action, you draw a line between them, and then you don't cross that line with your cameras in this shot unless there's a good reason to, right? So in this case, you have a dialogue scene between this man and this dog, right? And so you draw an invisible line between them, right? Because they're having a conversation between each other, and the cameras are not crossing that line, right? They stay on this side, so they can be more or less at any angle and any height and any distance away from this line, but they're not going to cross over, right? So you can see here, like you have this conversation between these characters. If you go from camera A to camera B, right, because this guy's still on screen left and the dog is still on screen right, it's really easy to you know, follow along with that. Same thing with camera B, right here, showing these characters at a distance, right? Seeing this is really easy to follow. Camera D is a problem though, because what it does is it flips and disorients the scene, right? It might not always be obvious to us when we break it down this slowly, but it feels off, and it causes those couple microseconds of confusion in the viewer that makes them uncomfortable and makes the shot kind of distracting, right? So these characters are switching. This dog is no longer on screen right. He's now on screen left, and so it just kind of flips it and confuses things. Right? Here's some two other visualizations of it. Right. So you have this invisible line between the characters, and that camera. Those cameras could be anywhere over here, just as long as they don't cross over to the other side. Okay. I have an example right here. So here's another example in Maya, and it is. There we go. So we have these two characters sitting across from each other, right? And I have two cameras on each side for essentially an over-the-shoulder dialogue scene between two characters, right? So this camera right here is looking over the shoulder of Caesar at Nefertiti, right? And this shot over here, if we go to perspective. Here, right, we're looking over Nefertiti's shoulder at Caesar and eating his cereal in the morning, right? So it's just another visual diagram of it. If I went the other way, so let's go ahead and I'm going to take this and I'm going to rotate this. Okay, ignore the background, right, because it's a little weird. But if I'm going to go to perspective here, right? So we're looking over Caesar's shoulder at Nefertiti, and now we go over to here, right? That's a very weird and disorienting jump, right? Because we've kind of rotated all the way around to the other side of Nefertiti's shoulder, and we cross that 180-degree line, and so that jump makes it feel really weird, right? Whereas right here, if we jump back and forth between these two shots, it's not that hard to keep this mentally in check, because Nefertiti, or this character, is always going to be on the right, and he's always going to be on the left. Right. Okay. So general rules, we're going to wrap this up, talk about some storyboard stuff, specific stuff for drawing storyboards. Try to avoid flat staging. Use perspective if you can. It doesn't have to be fancy, but just think about characters in three-dimensional space. You don't have to draw them in three-dimensional space, but how they relate to their environment in three-dimensional space. So you can use grids to ground your characters and make them feel like it makes the shot easier to read, right? So here, sorry for the decreasing quality in images. Every time I copy and paste this slide presentation, the images get worse and worse. But you know, this character is just drawn on a line. I can't tell, is he supposed to be in front of it, behind it? Is he supposed to be on a tight wire? I can't tell. You know, over here we have some depth cues, including like a grid line, which really establishes scale and location of the camera. All right, so drawing some grid lines, just really quick, easy grid lines, is a great idea. This example here, with especially an action sequence, if I didn't have this little sketch of the environment, this storyboard would be super confusing, right? Because these characters are moving very dynamically through space, and it can become pretty hard to follow. And here's kind of like a more advanced grid line that's kind of showing the environment. But very illustrative, right? It's very easy to understand the space. And here it's great for emphasizing like the shot layout, right? That kind of like one-point perspective, tunnel vision, showing like this kind of like tunnel sequence these, I'm pretty sure they're Avatar characters, are in. Use foreground, midground, and background to sell depth. So establishing like something in the foreground and something in the background can really help you kind of get a sense of the space. You don't have to do this, again, just like the perspective, you don't have to do this for every storyboard frame, but you might want to do it for some of them just enough so that when you're pitching your ideas, people can understand, oh, okay, this space is like this, the character's in this, okay, it's going to make a lot more sense for me. Make it clear which characters are which. You don't have to do these letters like this. You could if you want. Your storyboards don't have to be beautiful. But you know, giving character just like a different color, or like, you know, a different hairstyle, or just like a key element of their body, that makes it clear who's who. It makes it easier for us to follow, especially when we have multiple characters. Value and tone is very, very helpful for storyboards. If you can, if you're going to start drawing like a bit of the environment or multiple characters, this helps us understand what we're supposed to be looking at, because just contrast is going to control what I'm supposed to be looking at, right? High contrast, it increases the focal attention on that object, and then low contrast makes things not important. So things over here, very low value contrast, right here, very high value contrast, right? And before that, this scene's kind of a jumbled mess, right? It's easy enough for us to follow, right? It's not that complicated an image, but it takes us a second to read it. But this one's super easy to read. So we get a sense of space and volume. You can use this to like kind of like darken or lighten different depth fields to make it easier for us to kind of understand like distance, right? Kind of like this example right here, and this example right here, right? So you can see this box in the foreground is kind of darkened, right? Which we kind of ignore it, right? Because we're supposed to be focusing on this character. So different value levels at different depth levels also helps us understand the space and separates objects from each other. Same thing with this one, right? He's a lot darker than his environment, like around him is a lot brighter, right? So that we focus on him and we understand he jumps out a little bit more. Also, we can use value to create emphasis, right? So in this case, in this shot right here, everything is kind of the same, pretty much the same tone, right? These guys on the right and left are a little bit lighter in the background, but they're still all kind of the same. And the one isolated guy is a lot brighter, so we know we're supposed to be looking at him. You can see how much that changes. If I make him brighter, now I feel like I'm supposed to be looking at that character in this shot, right? Obviously, lighting's going to be doing this, but this really helps us with our storyboard too, right? Same thing right here, right? Easier for me to read this character and look at this character and know I'm supposed to be focusing on him, and he's supposed to be just in the background, right? Again, here's another storyboard, right? Cool, great drawing, but really, really hard to follow, right? Just a little bunch of like stylish lines, but over here, much easier to read. These characters are much more separated from their environment. Those lines got a lot lighter. These characters got blocked in with value, but he has higher contrast than these guys around him. So you know he's going to be the main character. So yeah, you use value to separate figures from their environments, right? Here's just some other cool examples of using values, layering and blocking so that the depth of the space is separated. So these foreground figures, these midground figures, and that background are all kind of like blocked and globbed together like a blob with their own value that kind of easily separates the space. Right? Background versus foreground characters, foreground versus background. Right? Here's some other cool little design guidelines for using tone and lines and simplifying the background, right? So using silhouette, light against dark, dark against light, volume and shading to kind of like really create form and isolate characters against their background. Avoid things like, really cluttered or busy background. You can do something kind of like that koala shot. Right here, right? You see how it's like everything behind him is kind of getting erased or fuzzed out. And same thing with this shot right here. That environment's kind of getting lighter. So it makes it easier for us to focus on that character and read them really easily. Tangent lines running into the characters, that can be kind of confusing because it breaks the character's silhouette and it makes it harder to tell what's background and what's the character. You can use just a plain white background. That's the simplest to make it easy to read the character, or you can do tricks to just tone out the background so we can easily read the character. Don't be afraid to use color. Just a little bit of color can make it easy, just like a value contrast creates focal points and emphasis. Color contrast creates focal points and emphasis, right? So we know just from these storyboards, it's super easy to follow this character, right? See, in this case, for cars, since they're all cars, their unique characteristics aren't as easy to see sometimes, so having those colors in the storyboards makes it easy for us to track characters. This is Lightning McQueen, and this is some other car that I don't know. When you do storyboards and when you do layout and when you play with camera, you should be motivating your shot angles and why you are changing from one shot angle to another shot angle. So motivating your camera cuts is called motivating your shots or motivating your cuts is creating a cut or choosing a shot based on something that's happening in the scene or something that you're trying to emphasize or show, right? So for instance, you can cut from one shot to another shot based on an action in the scene. So in this case, Nick is pulling out a a CD, right? And so when he pulls it out and points at it for the gag, we get this closer in shot so we can see his face and a close in detail of that shot. So you can choose a lot of different reasons for why you will cut to the next shot. So you can use actions of characters either exiting or entering the frame, or a character posing a question to another character, or a character pointing at something, right? So there's a lot of different ways you can do this. All right, so here's a good example of cuts, and so you can see they're cutting right here. So you can see he hears a noise off camera and he turns his head to look. So that's a great reason for us to cut, because we want to see what he's looking at or what he heard, right? So we see this bull, right? And then we get a close-up zoom-in shot of the bull to kind of see that relationship, or kind of it just kind of adds to the humor of the moment, just seeing that expression or that emotion of the bull. And then we want to see the guy's reaction in relationship to the bull. So we cut to there, right? There's no cut right here. So the character just kind of stands up, and then we have a wide shot, and then we cut there between this shot looking over the bull's shoulder of the character. We cut to a wider shot or a full shot showing both characters, because we want to show the bull walking towards the guy, right? And as the bull gets uncomfortably close, we want to cut to a shot that essentially shows the viewpoint of the bull and the guy's expression, so we can kind of see how he's feeling about this bull getting uncomfortably close to him. And then we'll cut so we can see the crazy expression of the bull, just to kind of add to the humor of the scene, right? So in this shot, we have these characters. This camera shot isn't changing. As soon as we hear a knock outside and the character looks off screen, we cut, and we have a good reason to cut to a new shot or new point of view, because we want to see what he's looking at. So we can see someone's outside the door. We have a reverse shot, so we cut to a new shot so we can see the character reacting and getting up, right? And then walking out of the frame. And as soon as he walks out of the frame, again, that's a good reason for us to cut, so we can see him entering the next shot over here, right? So we want to motivate our cuts or our jumps between different shots or camera angles. And we want to motivate it, and we want a reason for why we cut between them. Here's another example: character eating, right? And so this is essentially an ambiguous cut. One second. So in this example, the character, he has two examples, right? This one's the first pass, and this is the second pass. So this first pass, we just have this character eating toast, and then it cuts to show the plate, which is fine for the most part, right? It's not that hard to follow for the overall, but it can be a little disorienting, right? So in this example where they cleaned up or fixed it, they just added a shot where the character looks down, right? And so that motivation, seeing the character look down out of shot, when we jump to this point of view shot looking down at the plate, it's really easy for us to understand, oh, he's looking at something, now I want to see what he's looking at, right? This example up here, he's just eating, and then we jump to another shot, and we don't really know exactly at first why we jump to that shot, right? It's so that we can grab a piece of bacon, but initially we don't know why we're looking at this. So that motivation helps us understand the why of the shot and makes it a little bit easier to follow, right? Here's just another example. Another thing to keep in mind is character silhouette in terms of readability. So making sure your characters are easy to follow, easy to read. Use contrast and silhouette to make it easy to see things and understand characters and separate them from the background and follow along, right? Let's go ahead and let me see if I might skip through some of these. Whew, this is a long presentation. Okay, so rule of thirds is just like kind of like a common convention of like a comfortable placement within the frame that's dynamic and interesting, right? So characters being on these third spots, but not being so close to the frame or almost out of the frame that it becomes uncomfortable or weird, right? So in this case, we have, this character lining up. Essentially, the idea is you cut the frame into thirds or 9 squares, and those intersection lines or those lines are nice places or generally comfortable or good places to put things. After a while, you kind of get used to it. You don't really need this grid at all. But if don't have any experience with like composition or creating images, this might be something that you might want to implement so that you get comfortable with it, right? So these are just hot zones, or this intersection point between those lines. Those are just great places to put focal points. Making everything parallel makes it difficult, just like some of those other examples of just putting the character just standing just on the line but not having any grid or perspective. Same thing with making all of your lines parallel can make it kind of hard to understand the space just because you're flattening perspective and you don't really know what's supposed to be in front of other things. Give yourself some room. So give your character, if you start drawing, give yourself plenty of room to work with. Especially if you're working digitally, it's a lot easier because you just crop in and crop out. But just keep that in mind. Don't cram your characters like this right here. Speaking of which, there's something called lead room. It's also called head room or nose room. And it's just giving yourself space in front of the nose in the direction someone's pointing and above their head. It just makes it a little bit more comfortable. So here's an example of good headspace or good nose room, or not headspace, good nose room or lead room, right? So this space over here, this guy's facing this direction. So because he's facing this direction, it creates a lot of visual weight in this direction, right? So it feels a little bit more comfortable to have him on the right side and having a little bit more empty breathing room over here in the direction he's facing, rather than the alternative, which is we're giving more room on the right and we're pushing him so his nose is almost pushed into the wall, right? So it just kind of makes it difficult because it's, we're not sure what he's looking at, we're not sure what he's focusing on, and it pulls us out of the frame, right? This becomes dead space. Whereas up here, he's focusing, or he's looking this direction, and it kind of balances out the composition a bit better. Tangents, make sure where you can avoid them because here's various examples, and I recommend you guys check this out. But they draw our attention and they also kind of break the space, right? So in some cases, like right here, we lose that line of the roof and it kind of becomes weird because we're not sure exactly why or what's hat and what isn't hat, what's the roof. This right here, bump up tangent, where they just kind of kiss each other, makes it so that it's hard for us to understand, oh, is her ponytail behind the light pole or basketball hoop pole or not, right? And then these things just kind of call attention to themselves and make it a little uncomfortable. And use arrows to signify camera moves, character moves, anything like that. So in this case, this little character right here is flying forward, right? And so the camera, these lines right here are showing, and there's like a little square that the camera is zooming out backwards while the character is moving forward, right? So here's some good examples of a character kind of zooming or trucking in, right? So drawing a line from drawing an arrow from the corner of the frame to a new little tiny frame tells me that the camera is going to start wide and it's going to move forward until it frames the character right here. And here's the reverse of that, starting with a smaller frame and then drawing those arrows out. And then you can draw something like this where you have two frames that are essentially going to be in the film continuous. Like the camera is going to pan, which if you guys remember is like shaking your head no, looking left to right or right to left. So if we're going to pan from this woman looking at her purse over to the keys on the table, this kind of illustration helps us follow that camera movement and make sense of it. Like, oh, okay, we're going to be moving the camera from here to here. This is not a cut, right? Here's some more examples. Zoom in, zoom out, push in, push out. There's a lot of different methods people like to use for this. And let's see, I think that's about all I want to cover. So there's plenty of other story examples, a lot of those visual examples I had from Grizz and Norm from this website called Flooby Newbie, prepared a board by Nancy Beeman, directing films Shot by Stephen Kantz, and directing story by Francis Glevis. So I recommend you guys, if you're interested in storyboards, to do some further reading, and if you really like it, definitely pursue it. It just takes a lot of studying and understanding why we frame and shoot films the way we do, and also learning how to draw fast. You don't have to be a great drawer, you just have to be a quick drawer.